South Carolina history book, you would probably see next to nothing about my tribe or any still existing tribe today in South Carolina. I am a tribal advocate. I've worked with tribes and governments ranging from South Carolina, Georgia, Minnesota, and I've even spoken at the UN regarding tribal affairs. But I come from a tribe right here, the Wassamasaw tribe of Varnertown Indians. It's a very long name, and we've been known by many throughout the years, from the Etowah, the Edisto, Somerville Indians, Varnertown Indians, just settlement Indians, and eventually the Wassamasaw tribe of Varnertown Indians. But what are we and where do we come from? The federal government defines us as being a settlement tribe, which means we are from a multitude of tribes and native people that were forced out of their first contacted location into a central location where they eventually started intermarrying and became a distinct community because of that. So we became a distinct community in about the 1750s. But where did we come from before that? Where did we get moved from? And the answer to that is we came from right here on the Charleston Peninsula as well as the nearby Etowah Island. A lot of you might not recognize the name Etowah Island because it's actually been renamed to Daniels Island. A man named Robert Daniels came in, he bought the island, we got relocated to the Goose Creek area, and eventually we were granted land in the Wassamasaw Swamp. But right here is a historical marker that our community worked very hard to put up just down the street in Daniel Island, Governor's Park. It took about 2 years, and sadly, historical markers like this is really the only thing that our tribe has, at least tangible, to connect us back to the location that we were at for millennia. And as Native people even, we don't have any rights or access to our material culture, our physical culture, even the bodies of our dead. For example, Daniel Island is very, very developed. So our tribe had an exhibit at the nearby Berkeley County Museum, and we really wanted to work with some of the developers to put some of the artifacts that were found out on display. But they just didn't work with us. They didn't want to allow us to showcase that. So we have no access to our own history. About 500 years ago, my other ancestors, the Edisto Indians, were on the nearby Edisto Island, or you might know it as the Edisto Beach State Park. It's a very famous state park. It's huge. I personally love it, but it has a lot more of our physical culture that still remains. Right there, you'll actually see the Edisto Indian shell mounds. Those are some of the largest shell mounds in the nation, but if you went there today, you wouldn't be able to find them. It's not because they're well hidden. They've actually been lost to time and tide, having fallen back into the ocean. But even still, archaeologists and other digs are going on in that island trying to rediscover our history, the history that we were forced to abandon. And I actually was able to sit in on one of those with some other members of my tribe, just seeing all the pits, digging down 6 feet just to find some of the artifacts, the remains, trying to just map out, like I said, the history that we were forced to abandon. Eventually, the Edisto, like my Etowah ancestors, would be forced into that same area, right off of the Cherokee Pass, where eventually they would settle together, and Cherokee and Catawba people would move in and start intermarrying, and we've been thriving there for about 300 years to this point. But as a Native community, when you don't have your access to your material culture, your physical culture, the places you've been for all this time, what is there to pass down? What is there to hold on to as a community? And I think the answer to that is stories. So today I'm going to tell you 3 stories just about my personal history, my personal family, just to give you guys a bit of a glimpse into my community's history and what we had to face over the past 200 years. This right here is a very famous photo. It is actually the only known photo of a Lowcountry Indian in the entire Library of Congress. It is also a picture of my great-great-grandmother with her fur coat, my great-grandfather with his hands in his pocket, as well as my 2 great-uncles, one of them being my great-uncle Hamp, and he's the one petting the family dog. This photo was taken in 1938 because, FDR, with the New Deal, he wanted to create the Farm Bureau, and they went all across the nation taking pictures, and this was one of the pictures taken. It was entitled Somerville Indians, because that's what we were known as at the time, as well as brass ankle family. And brass ankle was a derogatory term used for both Native people as well as people who were mixed with either Native or African American. There are some accounts about how this picture was taken, who was there. Was my great-great-grandfather inside because he didn't want to come out, because he didn't want to pose for a photographer. But our community, although we were aware that people came through, we didn't really know about this picture until just about 2 decades ago, when it was actually on display at the nearby College of Charleston, and someone said, "Isn't that my great-grandmother?" And it turned out we had all this history out there that we didn't know was documented and in the world. Around the time when this photo was taken, segregated schools were also imposed. A lot of people know that there were African and white schools, but not a lot of people knew that the state also mandated segregated Indian schools all over. So one of the main Indian schools from my community was the Varner Indian School. This Indian school was a one-room schoolhouse placed right in the center of the community, and it only went up to the 5th grade. And for many, many years, that's all the education that the people of my tribe, my elders, they had. Less than an elementary level education. Eventually, during desegregation, the school would close, but for people, that did not mean that all of them went to the schools. Sometimes buses wouldn't come through, sometimes the segregation and the racism would cause people to want to drop out. And so right now you're seeing sometimes the first few generations have been able to complete education or get postgraduate education. But my grandfather was actually an alum of one of these schools. That's him right there. And he, unlike many other children, was able to continue his education, but not in a very positive way. You see, like many Native and African children or minority children at the time, the government said that he was not in a suitable living environment, and so they took him from his family up to a boarding school in North Carolina. And he talked about some of his time at the schools, the things he went through, the derogatory terms and things said to him by both sometimes other students and even the staff. I remember he said something along the lines of that he was told that he smelled, and that if he could just scrub his skin hard enough, he could remove both the smell and the color from it. He also talked about his last day at that school, where him and some of his classmates decided they were going to get back at the headmaster, and they pushed his car up a cliff until it was sent rolling down a ravine. After that, he left, he came back to the community, and eventually he became a really good craftsman, construction worker, and built many of the houses in Hanahan, South Carolina today. Right around the time when the schools desegregated, we go back to my great Uncle Hamp. At this time, he was a man grown. He had a family, a wife from the community, but the only difference was she could pass for white while he couldn't. One day after work, my great uncle wanted to go to the bar, get a drink, de-stress, unwind, and his wife accompanied him. And right when he was saying goodbye to her, she was going to go do her tasks, he was going to go and have a drink, she kissed him goodbye. My great uncle went into that bar, and because he was seen kissing a woman who, at the time, people assumed were white, he was surrounded and he was murdered. The coroners and the papers would call it being stomped to death. Not many people know that we also in Native communities had these racial attacks, racial targetings, and this was in 1961. It wasn't a lifetime ago, it was in living memory. And for Native people, it was even more dangerous, as in families you had people who varied in color from brother to brother, from mother to child, and we were very self-segregated. And one of those things about intermarrying, miscegenation laws, we married with other tribes, and we networked with other tribes and stayed to each other. A decade later, in 1972, my community would be officially discovered by the Bureau of Indian Affairs. But we were discovered about 2 decades too late. Because in the 50s, termination came to America. And termination was not going out and saying, we're going to kill all the natives, but it was about reintroducing the American people, the Native American people, into American society and reclaiming reservation lands. So after that point in time, there was no recognition. There was just acknowledgement of saying, these are Native communities, and our community was documented as the Somerville Indians, but unlike other tribes who got that protection as soon as that happened, we were left without protection. Right here are some of the many tribes that were scattered all throughout the state and tribal communities, and eventually we continued to try to work to maintain ourselves, maintain our communities, and in 2005, the state officially established state recognition. But many of those policies that would protect us are still out of reach. And federal recognition is something that is very daunting. There is a process out there that was created in '78, and only a handful of tribes have been able to get through it. It costs millions and millions of dollars and can take decades. Decades that tribes like mine, where we're already seeing encroachment and development, we don't think we have those decades. So many tribes, like my own, is working towards recognition, towards protection, because we are an endangered species. Our numbers are few, and we really don't know if we'll be here just a few years down the line. But this is just 3 stories from one person out of hundreds from dozens of tribes across the East Coast. And a lot of people don't know their tribes, especially in South Carolina. You hear all the time, I didn't know we had tribes in South Carolina. And in a state where we're growing by about 400,000 people per year, that's just going to get worse and worse. It's a very famous phrase, we are still here. It's a Native American phrase about raising awareness about the existence of tribes and the struggles we face. It's very easy to find out what tribes are in your state. We're on Google. We're not in the 17th century anymore. We're in the 21st. If you Google us, you'll usually find websites. You'll find our social media. We have events. And we want you to come out. This is an open invitation. Our events are open to the public, our celebrations. Most of the time, people think they're closed out. We want to work with you. We want you to know about us. And we really hope we see you out there, because we can't do this by ourselves. It's not just enough having you know that we're still here, but we want you to also know and understand the struggle that we go through every day to maintain the right to remain here.